Hi listeners, John and I have tried multiple brands and forms of CBD over the last 2 years. I use it for inflammation and to help with what we call stressies here at Living in the Sprawl. And John uses it right before bed for better sleep quality. After our search, we have found one that works great for both of us. We are huge fans of JustCBD sugar-free gummies. They are great tasting and offer a variety of different flavors and strengths. If tinctures or topicals are more your speed, they have options for those as well. They have a great customer service team that I have personally worked with, are cost effective compared to other brands out there, and offer free shipping on orders over $35. JustCBD store is offering our listeners 20% off every order when you use the link in the show notes or on our website and the code SPRAWL, SPRAWL. Check them out and let us know what you think. Hi listeners and fellow adventurers, this is Living in the Sprawl's lovely and talented fiancé/producer, Lisa Lowe, here to tell you about Everytable, which I have enjoyed for the past few months. I work a full-time job outside of producing this podcast, so my days typically start at 4 a.m. to exercise, work a full day, cook, clean, and work on this podcast, all while trying to get to bed by 9 p.m. Like many of you, there aren't always enough hours in the day to do it all. So I do rely on food delivery that requires little to no prep, is healthy, cost-effective, and most importantly, delicious. Everytable's mission is to transform the food system to make fresh and nutritious food accessible to everyone, everywhere. They offer fresh, made from scratch, ready-to-eat meals that start at $5 each. For the Los Angeles foodies out there, meal options also include a curry chicken from Trap Kitchen and a Creole chicken grain bowl from Post and Beam. I have ordered just about every meal they offer and can tell you that I have not had one that I did not enjoy and would not order again. Everytable is offering our listeners 2 free meals and free delivery when you use the code SPRAWL, SPRAWL, on your first subscription order. I will put the link in the show notes and on our website at livinginthesprawlpodcast.com. Be sure to tag us and Everytable in your social media posts and let us know what you think. And now, your humble correspondent and this week's episode.
Hello, and welcome to another installment of Living in the Sprawl, Southern California's most adventurous podcast. I am your humble correspondent and host. My name is Jon Steinberg. Sitting alongside me, as always, is my lovely and immensely talented producer/fiance. Her name is Lisa Lowe, and we are gathered here to present you with a wonderfully inspired episode. As we often discuss here on the podcast, Southern California represents so much more than merely the western end of the United States. It's also a state of mind, a state of being, a place that caters to creativity and artistry at the highest possible levels. Part and parcel of this reality is the close alignment the region has had for the last 75 years or so with the music industry. Whether we're talking about Laurel Canyon and the folk rock scene from the late 1960s and the early 70s, or the hip-hop scene that came out of southeast Los Angeles and the Compton area, Southern California's connection to music is indisputable. The inspiration for this particular episode came on a day when I was trying to find a hallowed Jamaican restaurant on Washington Boulevard in Los Angeles in kind of the Arlington Heights area. And I found out that I was within walking distance of the studio that Ray Charles had called home for many decades. And rather than an enormous neon lighting fixture hung in front of the house, it was just a house. And I took the opportunity to walk inside and figured out that this completely historic recording studio was located at a nondescript home in a not particularly glamorous part of Los Angeles. I envisioned Mr. Charles recording some of his classic hits, sitting at the piano, dazzling whoever happened to be inside while putting Georgia on My Mind, What I Say, and the rest of his catalog to record. This got me thinking about some of the other recording studios that might be located elsewhere in the city. Were they in such innocuous settings? I had to find out. So I came up with a list of the 10 most important, still operational recording studios in Southern California. Now, with the exception of one of them, I've been to all of them, and I can honestly say that this tour that I'm about to lead all of you on, while primarily, as expected, set within the bounds of Hollywood, does take you to some extremely unique locales while offering a wide cross-section of humanity on full panoramic display. No huge marquees, no Klieg lights off in the distance, and nary a camera held by the paparazzi in sight. Here now we present to you our list of the 10 most important and still functioning recording studios located within the bounds of Southern California. We begin our journey here at number 10, starting in Hollywood at the Jim Henson lot. Now, this is on La Brea Boulevard, south of La Brea and Sunset. And while it's known as the Jim Henson Company lot at the moment, this historic space was first renowned for being the home of Charlie Chaplin. He built a studio here in the year of our Lord 1917, and the majority of his early productions were filmed on the lot. For many, many years, on the gates set in front of the studio lot, there was a big statue with his tramp character built for the world to see. Now there stands a statue of a different kind. Kermit the Frog is now immortalized in bronze on the gates leading to the studio lot. And wouldn't you know it, dear old Kermit is dressed like Charlie Chaplin's tramp character from his early talkie productions. So after Charlie Chaplin grew disillusioned with the film industry and relocated to Europe, the space was occupied by A&M Records, led by one-time jazz wunderkind Herb Alpert, who we'll be talking about in great detail on a future episode because Herb Alpert has his hands in a lot of different pies in the City of Angels. And it was while the space functioned as the A&M recording lot that its real contribution to the history of music truly got going. So it was here that records from Burt Bacharach and a number of jazz greats were recorded, which then gave way to most of the studio recordings by The Police, and then the solo recordings by Sting, who were A&M recording clients, as well as bands like Soundgarden and even The Offspring. Bruce Springsteen recorded here, but the most famous piece of music ever produced on the lot might very well be the 1980s We Are the World anthem, which enlisted the aforementioned Boss, Michael Jackson, members of U2, and a whole host of others, as the song urged the global community to be a bit more mindful of matters concerning less wealthy countries. A&M Records was purchased by Polygram, and then a whole host of business-oriented sales and manipulations came into play until 2000, and this is when Jim Henson's children bought the lot and converted it into the official home for all things Jim Henson. Bands like Offspring have recorded on the lot since then, and even though this site is listed on the National Register of Historic Places because of its association with Chaplin and A&M Records, I don't know that it necessarily holds a great deal of weight in the public consciousness for its connection to the recording industry, but it certainly deserves to be mentioned along with some of the other places that we're going to discuss on this episode. So, at number 10, we begin our tour of the most important recording studios in Southern California with the one at the Jim Henson lot in Hollywood. At number 9, Conway Recording Studios, which, surprise, surprise, is also in Hollywood. Now, if we began the list with a bit of a trek into the past, talking about artists such as Burt Bacharach and The Police, Bruce Springsteen, etc., then we find ourselves catapulted into the future, nay, the present, as we examine Conway Recording Studios. This state-of-the-art, ultra-modern complex is on Melrose, across the street from the Paramount lot. And if you type in Conway Recording Studios, like the first 5 videos that come up are ones that feature The Weeknd driving in a Rolls Royce pulling up to the studio gates. This location has found great favor with the contemporary artists who reign supreme over the Billboard Top 200 chart. The Weeknd has done a great deal of recording here. Justin Bieber, Bruno Mars, many of the millennial artists call this recording palace home. It's widely known throughout the industry that if you decide to record here, you're going to be spending a pretty penny, but you're also going to be rewarded with all of the accoutrements that you might expect to accompany a ridiculously expensive recording session. Jacuzzis are on site, meditation gardens. I think they're trying to create a certain kind of vibe, a vibe meant to compel the best possible performances out of artists. So when I was researching locations that needed to be included for this episode, I thought about, well, Phil Spector, his Wall of Sound. Where was Gold Star Recording Studios? Well, that's now a strip mall off of Santa Monica and Vine. And I have to imagine that while the old-timey, quote-unquote, classic studios like Gold Star, as well as TTG, RCA, MCA, and a number of others, while they were great for their particular time, the reason they no longer exist is because they failed to anticipate what perhaps was coming in the future. And what I mean by that is I don't know that they anticipated the need for a meditation garden on the premises. But if you're The Weeknd and you played the halftime show at the Super Bowl and you're pulling up to the studio in a Rolls Royce, then I would think Conway is where you want to be. So that's why we have it here on our list at number 9. At number 8, Studio City Sound. We head over the hill into the San Fernando Valley setting up shop on Whitsett Avenue at the former home of Fidelity Studios. What is now Studio City Sound was once Fidelity, and this was where a young Billy Joel recorded his Cold Spring Harbor album, and the property has seen a great deal of noted artists since its founding decades ago. Albums by T.I., Juicy J, Nelly, Meghan Trainor, Kelly Clarkson have all been recorded here. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. This is the type of building that you would drive by 150 times or walk by 1,000 times without ever registering that it's anything other than perhaps a commercial office building. As nondescript as it gets, Studio City Sound is a no-frills locale where artists can truly sink their teeth into a project without the distracting trappings that may be on hand at other places where they could choose to record. And there's a distinctly different vibe, too, in the Valley when it comes to recording or filming, anything like that. You aren't on Sunset and Vine. You aren't in the middle of the Strip, nor are you within walking distance of the Pantages Theater or the Walk of Fame. The artists who have recorded at Studio City Sound have earned Grammy Awards and nominations and much popular and critical acclaim, and this studio has managed to roll with the ebbs and flows of the music industry, again, starting as Fidelity, where Billy Joel recorded, and existing in different forms, all the way to the present, to handle the likes of Nelly. So for a different vibe, a different taste, producing a wide variety of sounds from artists, we wanted to shout out Studio City Sound. At number 7, the Village Recording Studios in Westwood, West Los Angeles. Again, nowhere in the vicinity of the hectic Hollywood rush. This actually used to be a Masonic temple. The building dates back to the 1920s, functioning in that capacity for several decades until it was acquired on behalf of the Maharishi in the 1960s, where it was used as a spiritual gathering location, as well as a place where the group associated with the Maharishi kept a lot of their paperwork. There's a great podcast. It's an entire season of American Scandal chronicling this group and their rise and downfall. And this location factors into a really important part of the story. So shout out to that season of the American Scandal podcast if you are interested in that portion of the property's history. Now, fast forward to the 1970s, where the building was acquired by the heir to the Hormel fortune. And at this point, it was turned into a recording studio. And I wanted to feature this particular studio on the list due to its association with recordings for film and television soundtracks. So that iconic intro to The Simpsons, that was recorded here. The opening bars that begin each episode of The X-Files, those were recorded here. And a number of other film and television related projects had their soundtracks recorded at this particular studio. Additionally, it's been a home to artists like Steely Dan, John Mayer, and Sarah Bareilles. And there are a number of interesting videos that you can watch on YouTube that go into much greater detail regarding the property's history with the music industry. And as was the case with Studio City Sound, This is a building on a residential side street in Westwood. It's just off Santa Monica Boulevard, but unless you were truly looking for it, you would never find it. I walked by it plenty of times without realizing, oh wow, the intro to The Simpsons was recorded here. And some of the greatest songs from Steely Dan, they were recorded here. I would have had no earthly idea. And this was the studio that maybe infamously was the home for the recording of Fleetwood Mac's follow-up to Rumors, where roughly $1 million were poured into customizing parts of the studio to better cater to Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham, and the rest of the group. Of course, Tusk is nowhere near as successful as Rumors, but the alterations were kept in place for future recording sessions. But for a little taste of the west side of Los Angeles, again, a different vibe, a different perspective, but still a nondescript, unusual location. We wanted to salute all of the recordings that have been commissioned at the Village Recording Studios on the west side. And number 6, Westlake Recording Studios. So, while doing research for this episode, one of the questions I had was, where was Thriller recorded? The highest selling album of all time, Michael Jackson's iconic Thriller, was recorded at Westlake. Now, there are a couple of different studios owned and operated by Westlake, but the studio where Michael Jackson recorded Thriller is on Beverly Boulevard, and 3 of the other rooms are on Santa Monica Boulevard. These are both technically in West Hollywood, and one of my favorite nuggets was learning that Alanis Morissette recorded Jagged Little Pill in the same studio as Michael Jackson and his recording of Thriller. Additionally, yes, there have been a number of other very successful artists that have chosen to record at Westlake, but you're just not going to top Thriller. And to mention some of the other ones, I think would sort of be to minimize its importance to the overall recording landscape in Southern California. But Jagged Little Pill is different, and picturing Alanis belting out You Oughta Know in the same exact room where Jacko gave the world Thriller is kind of a thrill in and of itself, and proof that sometimes there are such things as magical spaces. Number 5, the Record Plant. Now, this studio, which originally has its roots set in New York City, was housed in a building on 3rd Street in the Fairfax district, but a fire broke out in the late 1970s, and the space became too small, so operations were moved to Hollywood proper, a few blocks away from the Jim Henson lot on Sycamore. The studio might be most famous for hosting a number of jam sessions with the likes of John Lennon, Mick Jagger, Stevie Wonder, members of Fleetwood Mac. Any and everyone seems to have had some type of dalliance with the Record Plant. There's a really famous recording called Too Many Cooks, which features Jagger and some of the other folks that I mentioned, that was included on Mick Jagger Greatest Hits album in 2007. So, you all have the pleasure of listening to probably the most noteworthy thing that ever came out of the Record Plant space, with branches in the aforementioned New York City area, as well as Sausalito, Northern California, the Los Angeles area outpost for the Record Plant is the only remaining location, and has now successfully transitioned into the modern era, with Kanye West recording his first 3 albums at the studio. So the song Through the Wire was laid down at the record plant, and actually Kanye was in his infamous car accident while going home from the studio, and when he came back to record Through the Wire, he did so with his jaw completely wired shut, and most of the actual recording for The College Dropout was done here. Justin Bieber has used the space for his album Purpose. Ariana Grande laid down some songs for Thank You Next. And Queen Bee herself, Beyonce, has recorded songs for Lemonade, as well as a couple of her other extraordinarily successful albums at the record plant. And again, when so many other studios, prominent ones that recorded the likes of Sam Cooke and Elvis Presley, when those fell, it was spaces like the record plant that figured out a way to persevere, to continue building on their incredible history that now links Stevie Wonder and Mick Jagger to Kanye West and Beyonce. So that's why we had to have it here at number 5, the record plant. At number 4, Shangri-La, which takes us to the extreme west side, all the way out to Zuma Beach, to the cliffs hovering above Zuma Beach, actually, where we focus our attention on Shangri-La, Rick Rubin's modern paradise-like cathedral dedicated to recording some of the best and brightest in music. Now, the property was originally owned by a Spanish film star who built a home overlooking Zuma Beach that functioned in the 50s, rumor has it, as a brothel. From there, the property was actually used as a primary filming location for Mr. Ed, the show with the talking horse that my dad used to tell me about as a kid, and I wouldn't believe him that, wait a minute, it wasn't animated, it was an actual horse, and he was speaking, and people bought this. And he'd say, yeah, people, they just thought he was a funny talking horse. Well, Mr. Ed happened to reside in the cliffs hovering over Zuma Beach, but its reason for inclusion on our list here comes when the group, the band, had it turned into a recording studio in the 1970s. Footage of the band recording on site can be seen in Martin Scorsese's landmark documentary, The Last Waltz, and the band helped turn it into a quote-unquote Shangri-La, meant to serve as something of an artist retreat, a place where musicians could get the most out of themselves musically. If you weren't going to be inspired by the great vaunted history of Hollywood and the quote-unquote glamour, even though the location is seriously not glamorous, that people associate with that area, then what would happen if you recorded at a place where you literally had an unobstructed view of the Pacific Ocean and dramatic waves clashing against the cliffside hills surrounding your very studio? Well, the band tried this out for size, and it worked wonders for the group, with Richard Manuel actually residing in the area where the horse from Mr. Ed used to reside. Bob Dylan would come here, Eric Clapton would come here, Van Morrison, same thing. And in the 80s, it served as a site for recordings by artists like Bonnie Raitt, and as highlighted by the 4-part Showtime documentary series about the property called, surprise, surprise, Shangri-La, The location was purchased by Rick Rubin in 2011, and a multitude of phenomenal recording artists have stopped by to lay down tracks at the facility. So if you watch the documentary, you see Kings of Leon recording there, Adele, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, members of the Beastie Boys, Linkin Park. It takes its name, Shangri-La, from the Hilton novel Lost Horizon, which focuses on a utopia, a place where any and everyone can be the best versions of themselves. And this is what Shangri-La is truly all about. You aren't going to find a more beautiful place to record music, probably in the United States, maybe even the world. And this is why, even though a lot of the original tracks were laid down during sessions in the UK, Adele's 21, which is the most successful, in terms of record sales, album of the 21st century, was partially recorded at Shangri-La. Eminem, his Berserker, or I guess it was just Berserk, was recorded here, and Rick Rubin's status as the most important record producer of the last 30 years has been cemented with the work that he's done at Shangri-La. So this list doesn't feature any discussion of the mansion, which I thought about including but ultimately decided not to. Rubin's kind of former studio on Laurel Canyon in Studio City, but the work that he's done at Shangri-La and the work that I'm sure he'll continue to do at Shangri-La, because the facility survived the Woolsey fire, even though his actual home did not, will continue to inspire work that merits discussion and inclusions on future lists such as this. So that's why we have to proudly take ownership of Shangri-La in Malibu. Number 3, Sunset Sound, which had a valiant case to be made the number 1 entry on this list. Originally a collection of homes and businesses on Sunset Boulevard, it was at the behest of none other than Walt Disney that his music directors acquired the property and had it renovated to become their primary recording studio. So a lot of the music for Disney films from the 60s onward was engineered and recorded here at Sunset Sound. But that's not why it's this high on the list. Well, an anecdote. My lovely and talented producer slash fiance and I were at a jazz show not too long ago at the Catalina Bar and Grill. And we realized that we were within walking distance of Sunset Sound. So I asked her, and she consented, to a nice jaunt over to check out the facility. And when we walked over there, and I don't like drawing attention to details like this, because they aren't all that important in the grand scheme of things, but during our walk to Sunset Sound, we had to actually move out of the walkway into the street to avoid walking by a person living in a tent right outside of Sunset Sound. I guess this is just where we are in the course of human history. In any case, we both looked at the building, and I said, "Can you believe this is where Purple Rain by Prince was recorded?" Yeah, he was singing When Doves Cry in that building right there. So it was with that knowledge of where the facility stands currently that a jaunt into the past might be instructive. So this was where the Doors recorded their first 2 studio albums. So Light My Fire was recorded here, Break On Through, People Are Strange, and it was where a lot of those aforementioned Laurel Canyon artists preferred to lay down their tracks. So Neil Young, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Joni Mitchell, parts of the Beach Boys' immortal Pet Sounds. All of that was commissioned on the property. And then as time kept on marching forward, as it has a tendency to do, Prince laid down Purple Rain at this hallowed recording studio in the 1980s. Guns N' Roses worked here, Tom Petty, and this was where Janis Joplin laid down the vocals for me and Bobby McGee right before her life came to an end at the Landmark Hotel, which was covered on a prior installment of Living in the Sprawl. Sunset Sound epitomizes everything that you might anticipate would be included in the history of a vaunted Hollywood recording studio. Legends abound about Jim Morrison breaking into the facility during a drunken rage. And when you stop and think about the amount of songs that have stuck around in the global pop culture lexicon, Sunset Sound might very well be the most important place in the history of modern musical recording. But we are indeed very blessed in this region, so it only comes in at number 3. Number 2, Capitol Recording Studios. For those of you unfamiliar with the Hollywood skyline, I don't blame you. There's not much of one to speak of. But if you can say that one does exist, then the building that you're probably thinking of is the Capitol Records building on Hollywood and Vine. And it was in 1956 that the building was erected with an amazing studio at the bottom with the noteworthy tower extending to the sky on top. Frank Sinatra was the first artist to ever record here in 1956, and the vast majority of his hit-laden catalog has been recorded here at Capitol Records. At the bottom of the building, there exists an underground echo chamber, which has been utilized by everyone from Tina Turner all the way to Justin Timberlake as the studio continues to churn out vital recordings 60 years removed from its founding. It was the favored place for people like Dean Martin to record, and it has existed so long that everyone from Muse to Imagine Dragons have also laid down tracks at the facility. Again, there was a tremendous case for Capitol Records to be featured at the number 1 spot on the list. Frank Sinatra is a preferred artist for your humble correspondent and host, as well as his lovely and talented producer / fiance. And just envisioning Old Blue Eyes setting down My Way for the first time is absolutely thrilling. Outsiders unfamiliar with Los Angeles will probably know the image of the Capitol Records building as it extends high into the sky and truly has been home to probably the most glamorous cross-section of artists ranging from genre to genre as decades have gone on. And that is why Capitol Records sits at number 2 on our list of Southern California's most important, and most importantly, maybe, still operational recording studios. Okay, here we are. We have finally arrived at our number 1 location on the list of most important recording studios in Southern California, Sound City in Van Nuys, California. So, you know that scene in any number of music biographies? You know, the one where the artist is sitting inside the studio and it's just not completely coming together, or there are a couple of things that need to be assuaged or manipulated in order for the song to come together just right. Like the one in Straight Outta Compton where NWA are doing take after take on Boys in the Hood before you can almost see the light click on in Eazy-E's brain, or the one in the recently produced Aretha Franklin biography, Respect, where she's at Muscle Shoals and the session comes together, illuminating her voice in the best way possible for the first time. Moments like that happen at places like Sound City. This is as far removed from what I was describing at like Conway, for example, as it gets. I wouldn't even describe the building where Sound City is located as nondescript. I would describe it as a step above needing to be condemned. This is not a great area, nothing particularly noteworthy in any way, shape, or form, remotely close to the location, and perhaps this is why it wound up being the landmark that it is. I would urge any and all of you to watch Dave Grohl's documentary on the facility, of course called Sound City, where the history of the property is chronicled and recounted by many of the folks who had a chance to live it. But this is the ultimate. No frills, no distractions, no accoutrements, nothing special. Just incredible sound. Sound City garnered its reputation for being the best place to capture drums. So in the documentary, Dave Grohl recounts laying down the drums for Smells Like Teen Spirit and being taken aback by how marvelous the recording truly was. Oh, did I mention that Nirvana's Nevermind was recorded at the Ramshackle building in Van Nuys? It was also where Tom Petty conducted many of his recordings, and it served as the place where your humble correspondent and host and his favorite band, Rage Against the Machine, recorded their first album, which is, of course, self-titled. Fleetwood Mac laid down the track Never Going Back from Rumors at the studio. Rick Springfield laid down Jesse's Girl, and musicians from all across the music industry found sanctuary at this pretty tattered cathedral in the Van Nuys section of the San Fernando Valley. If you think about Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Dave Grohl, and the quote-unquote spirit that they were attempting to capture on Nevermind, it makes a great deal of sense that Sound City was their preferred recording stop. I once read a great Nirvana biography called Heavier Than Hell, where there was an anecdote about a time when Courtney Love purchased a Lexus. She and Kurt were living in Los Angeles at the time, and she came home with the Lexus, and Kurt immediately chastised her, saying, "Take that back. We don't own cars like that in this family." And I have to assume that same ethos would be extended to the location where they would record the most famous rock album of the last 40 years, Nevermind, at Sound City in Van Nuys. And that's going to do it for another episode of Living in the Sprawl. We want to go ahead and thank everyone for their continued support. It really does help us out when you provide us with great feedback, which you can do by writing to us at our email address, livinginthesprawlpodcast@gmail.com. Living in the Sprawl Podcast. That is our Instagram handle. And we do invite you to write us with recommendations for possible episodes, content that you would like to hear discussed on a forthcoming installment of the show where we're excelling, where you think we might need to improve. We want to correspond, and we love doing so with you, our fantastic audience. And we are about to record a Patreon episode. For those of you who wish to contribute to us on Patreon, we greatly appreciate any and everything that you do for us. We're going to be posting the best burgers in Southern California very soon, and we promise to keep the content flowing to our Patreon page. It's going to be kind of more niche programming, so we want to start that with the best burgers in Southern California, and we're going to continue updating that as time marches on. And on behalf of myself, I am your humble correspondent and host. My name is Jon Steinberg. Lisa Lowe, my lovely and talented producer / fiancé, has done an amazing job as always as she produces the show and runs our social media accounts. Thank you so much for listening to Living in the Sprawl, Southern California's most adventurous podcast. Until next time.